heathen, no heathen, should no heathen, no heathen, should not judge I, should not condemn I, no heathen.
Wanna listen to me, I no make no noise. I come to read a letter when me dey write to my niece Punchinella, who live a foreign. Make me put on my spectacles. Dear Punchinella, me little darling, I long to see you. I hope you're taking good care of yourself. You remember the story then when we used to tell you about Bro Anansi, whose real name is Jack MANDORA, and the rest of them will live in a the little district named Left Me Come See Me? Well, Brother Snake him did live there too. And he became Bro Anansi's best friend. Now, in those days, Bro Snake's tale was magical. It could create the illusion that he was a very handsome young man of regal bearing. He could not maintain the illusion, however, whenever he was tired. Being a true Casanova like Bro Anansi, Bro Snake used the power in his tail to its full advantage. Let me tell you, my child. One day, he was in a neighboring village on business when he spied a very beautiful and delicate young lady approaching. His tale worked overtime, and the young lady became immediately smitten with love for him. His charm was so superb that he swept her off her feet. Full stop. No, Bro Snake was not the marrying type, but the young lady insisted that they had to get married before he could have his way with her. He was tempted to walk away from her, but the desire of his heart could not allow him to say goodbye to such a lovely creature, so he decided to play along for the time being. He made a great show of proposing, while she accepted coyly, and he strutted like a prince while she introduced the rest of the family. She had two brothers whose prowess and fierceness were legendary. They gave Bro Snake a mean, hard look, which made him shake in his shoes. Nevertheless, he put the best on the outside, and before he could slither to his village and seek Brother Anansi's advice, he found himself the groom in the largest and most elaborate wedding he had ever witnessed. Eventually, the time arrived when Bro Snake had to say goodbye and take his bride home. He hurriedly left before nightfall, taking her on his back as the custom was. Before he left, however, he was sternly warned by her two brothers, who gave him a look that would impale a boa constrictor to a Bro Snake. Anyway, Bro Snake set forth on his journey with his cheerful burden, ignoring all the warnings that were coming from that small inner voice. Shortly after he had left the village, he started to tire, and his tail began to waver, and he began to look more like a serpent and less like a man. Suddenly, the young bride glanced downward and found herself riding on a giant reptile which was heading towards a cave with her. Story come to bump. She screamed and screamed again and again. Unknown to Snake, her brothers were following not far behind to see them safely home. When they heard her scream, they rushed to the spot just in time to see the snake escaping through the woods, not before having his tail severed, however, by the younger one, who was the swifter of the two. Snake fled painfully home, while the two brothers returned to their village with their sister. But poor Brass Snake did not show his face again until his tail had grown. But alas, his new tail did not possess any of the magical powers of the first one. Poor snake. That is why snakes no longer have magical powers in their tails. And whenever you see them, they are always heading for the nearest pole tide. Jack Mandora. It's a story. Me don't want none. What do you think about my English? Is it nice enough? And talking about that, I don't finish yet, my darling. You have to hear about Miss Mello Mello and Miss Nosophemia. One day, two very beautiful witches took up residence in the village. It would perhaps be more correct to say, everyone woke up one morning and found them there. Lock, stock, and barrel. House, fowl coop, pigsty, wood pen, and rabbit hutch. That same morning, the village was invaded by scores of pigeons, which it turned out belonged to the two witches. They went about their business for 2 days, bustling about the yard and caring for the animals as if the village folk did not exist. Then, early in the morning of the third day, a funny-looking, loud-mouthed, barrel-chested little dwarf emerged from the house and marched to the village square, where he triumphantly announced that he was recruiting a maid for the two witches. Only, he did not refer to them as witches, but as noble twin sisters from a distinguished and upstanding family and heiress of great fortunes. The first applicant for the job was Tati, Tukuma's wife. Before anyone could utter a single sound of astonishment, both she and the dwarf disappeared inside the big, beautiful house. She remained here for a fortnight, frequently seen in uniform working hard as a slave. During that period, Tukuma, the thief, her husband, was on 2 occasions seen at the gate cursing, talking to himself, and shadowboxing violently. On one occasion, he fell to the ground and kicked viciously. The second time, he ran home for his cutlass and spent a good 15 minutes chopping at the air around the gate. Suddenly, the cutlass was flung from his hand and he fell to the ground. He lay there for a while and then gingerly got to his feet. He spent a short period examining himself as if for broken bones. Then he sped off, ran all the way home, and locked himself inside. At the end of the first fortnight, Tati burst from the witch's house, crying, and ran home only to be given a sound thrashing and ordered back to collect her pay. When she re-entered the witch's house, she stayed there another fortnight, at the end of which she left again, bawling loudly. All of the village gossips converged on Tukuma's place to try and unravel these mysterious goings-on for the benefit of all and sundry. They crowded into the yard, shouting loudly for Tukuma and Tati. No one emerged from the house until a short, elderly lady with a walking stick, to whom everyone referred as Aunt Minna, strode through the gate and up to the house, where, without asking any questions, she pulled aside the flap and went inside. Only a senior relative could do that. Nevertheless, a murmur ran through the crowd. She remained inside for about half an hour before re-emerging. A hush fell over the crowd, which had since grown quite big and noisy. She stopped at the doorway, arms akimbo. She glared at the crowd and shouted, "Where you no want?" Some said, "Tukuma," while the rest said, "Tati." "What them do now?" "Nothing," shouted someone. "We want to know about new house." "What about new house?" What happened down there? She was silent for a while. Nothing happened down there, she shouted back. People not crazy, nothing, they answered her. It was just a misunderstanding, she said slowly. But before the crowd could reply, Tati burst suddenly from inside the house and shouted, "They woke me and no one will pay me." "How come?" someone shouted back. "Because me don't know their name," she answered. Everyone started to speak at once, when suddenly they were interrupted by Kookaburra's raucous laugh. He hopped through the gate and announced that Blossom, Tiger's Blossom, had just been recruited by the dwarf from New House. You could hear a pin drop. Nobody moved except for Tatu, who kept jumping and shouting. But she was largely ignored by the gathering, who had slowly begun to trickle out one by one. Soon, they were all gone, leaving the two astonished women behind. Well, another fortnight came and went, but no Blossom emerged from the witch's house until another full 2 weeks had passed. Then she was evicted. I mean literally flung through the gate by the broad-chested dwarf. She ranted and raved in front of the gate for a long time, but seemed incapable of re-entering. A large crowd had gathered, and soon the whole village knew what the two witches had been up to. They had been tricking people to work for them without any pay by promising to leave them all of their wealth if and only if they can discover both their names, which does not seem too difficult, except that no one has ever heard their names and they never call each other by their names. No, there were quite a few brave hearts in the village, and these were tempted by the offer of great wealth. So in a few months, most of the women had already done a stint or two at the new house. Suffice it to say, no one had been able to guess the two witches' names. One day, after sitting by Brad Turtle's shop for a long time drinking soup and discussing the main topic of interest, Bro Anansi came home and confronted his wife, Ife, with an idea. She remained silent for a long time. Then she answered, "Anansi, my hero," she said, "whatever you say, I will do." Bro Anansi replied, "Thank you, my darling. I know I can count on you." Monday morning, bright and early, Ife gone to work at New House. It did not seem odd, however, since everyone knew that Bro Anansi was a wizard of some sort. And since everyone else was trying for the witch's loot, he was also expected to do the same. The odd thing about Ife, however, was the fact that she pushed a pram. Her youngest child had already left for school. Since Bro Anansi himself was nowhere to be found, there was no one to ask what was going on. She was halfway across the yard before she was intercepted by the dwarf, who cheerfully led her toward the rear of the large, beautiful building, where they met a creature who hardly seemed human. She was so tall, delicate, and charming that she seemed to radiate. The story of not having anyone to take care of the baby was readily accepted by her, and she pointed them toward the house. At the back door, they were stopped by a big, brawny, amazingly beautiful young woman holding a big black tomcat. First, she blocked their path. Then she invited them in. She was given the same excuse as the first one, but her reaction was very different. She immediately took charge of the pram, informing Ife that the baby would hinder her work. She left the pram, however, on the back veranda so that Ife could keep an eye on her infant. Soon, the baby started to cry. And cried he did all day and late into the night and wee hours of the following morning. He kept crying for a whole week. During the second week, he started crying less. But Ife would sneak up on him and give him a flesh-tearing pinch that made him howl for a period and help her to pretend to be busy. Come Friday morning of the second week, and Ife arose very early and placed the pram beneath the witch's bedroom window. Soon he started to make a racket while she pretended to be busy in the hen house. After a while, a window opened and the burly witch leaned out. "What is it, Miss Mello Mello?" a voice asked. "Nothing, Miss Nosophemia," she replied. "Just that ugly baby." But unknown to them, the baby's cries were now shouts of joy, for that baby was none other than Bro Anansi himself. When evening came and Ife was summoned before them, the witches were sure they had won. However, she looked at them quietly and said, "The fat one near Miss Mello Mello, and the maga one near Miss Nosophemia." In a flash, the two witches and everything they owned vanished, leaving Ife alone with her crown. She turned her head for home as the baby was heard chuckling deeply. Jack MANDORA, the story, Brother John him say the story thing, but me just run him. All him think about a dead body. The story sweet. Me darling, no, hold on there, Punchinella. You want to hear that one, yeah? Hey, the miracle. There was a great uproar in the forest not far from the charcoal kiln. Great horrific roars followed by massive stampings and growlings. Everyone rushed to see what was happening. They burst into a small clearing to see Bro Tiger and a massive cow in a standoff. Bro Tiger was in a great rage, but the cow seemed unconcerned, just aiming huge, murderous blows at him. Everyone knew Bro Tiger, but the cow was a stranger. So they called out to Bro Tiger, who stepped back, narrowly escaping a bone-wrenching front leg kick to the head. He scurried to his crowd of friends who plied him with a multitude of questions. He related what had happened to them while the cow challenged them silently. He had entered the clearing, had seen the cow, and had asked her to step aside and submit to him, but she had refused. He had then tried to box some sense into her, but the cow had kicked him between the ribs, and the result was a standoff which everyone had witnessed. Bro Tiger appeared to be bleeding from no one knows where and walked with a painful limp. He and everyone else was afraid of the strange cow who had appeared so mysteriously, but no one in that village but he knew what that cow was capable of. Chatty Bro Dog him had a go at the cow. He was dealt a neat swipe side to his rear end as he tried to get out of range. Nobody else ventured for a while. Suddenly, Bro Anansi stepped forward, declaring, "I am going to find out what this crop is all about." His wife begged him not to, but he rebuked her and she was silent. He was the skinniest man in the village. "Hi there, beautiful lady," he called out to the cow. "Can I have a minute of your most valuable time?" At first he did not answer. Then she nodded, and that was all he needed. Soon they were both so close, whispering and nodding, that anyone would think they were old friends. The village folk soon became restless and began calling out to Bro Anansi. "I'm busy," he replied. "Go on and leave me." After a while, they all left. Later that evening, Anansi was seen entering his yard with the cow. Everyone was in awe. Then suddenly, Bro Anansi became the richest man in the village. He had the most meat, the most milk, and the most butter. Even when he was out hunting or farming, the cow never strayed from his yard and always greeted him on his return. No, Bro Atukuma, the thief of the village, became curious of Bro Anansi's wealth and decided to watch him. One evening, while he was peeping through the thatch fence, he saw Bro Anansi approach the cow with a large pudding pan and a knife. He said some words to her and her mouth dropped open like a door and he entered her body. After a while, he re-emerged with the pudding pan full of meat and returned to the house. Shortly thereafter, he again approached the cow, this time with a very large calabash, which he filled with milk. Bro Tukuma's body tingled with excitement. He silently crept away. Late that night, Bro Tukuma was back. He pretended to be Bro Anansi, but the cow was half asleep and could not tell the difference. So when he mumbled, her mouth fell open automatically. Before going inside though, he ran toward her hind legs where he filled his mouth with milk. He then grabbed his pudding pan and scrambled inside the cow's body. All around him, Bro Tukuma saw tons of meat, steak, roast, liver, kidney, and then he saw a huge heart. He loved heart most of all. Unknown to him though, the cow had warned Bro Anansi not to cut any organs. So after loading his pudding pan, he cut a very large chunk of the heart. But unfortunately, the cow fell down dead. He was trapped inside. Bro Tukuma panicked and started to make noise. Bro Anansi heard and came to investigate. He quickly realized what the matter was and cut a large heap of maca, maca tree, with which he encircled the cow. Then he used a very sharp cutlass to cut the cow belly open. Bro Tukuma leapt with all his might when he saw that he was free, oblivious to the pain of the maca and the chop across his back. He literally flew home and remained critically ill for a whole fortnight. In the meantime, Bro Anansi held a big funeral for the cow, and the sermon was about stealing. Anyway, everyone soon forgot about Bro Anansi's cow. Jack MANDORA, Anansi had the daddy. We be like them Punchinella me no done yet, you know, darling. You did hear about your ass, you know? When they come there, you didn't hear about your ass, you know? When you come down and let me come see me, well, let me tell you about the ass, you know. I tell you that these were indeed strange times for everyone. Bro Tukuma had seemingly given up stealing. Hey, Bro Tiger had not been in a fight for a very long time. But the strangest of all, Bro Anansi was a very busy man. Every day he rose at the crack of dawn and hurried to his field. There he and his wife would spend the entire day chopping, digging, and planting. They usually returned home late in the evening. They were not overly worried about the safety of their 4 children who were left at home. The whole village lived like one big family, and any newcomer would be immediately spotted. Plus the yard was large enough for whatever game the little ones cared to indulge in, and their food was always left in a pot on smoldering coals in the fireplace. things have been going smoothly for quite a while when the wife noticed that despite the huge amount of food that was left each day and the fact that it was always eaten off completely, the children were always ravenously hungry when their parents arrived home and seemed to be growing thinner and acting more fearful with each passing day. Matters finally come to a head one morning when the smallest one began crying uncontrollably and refused to remain at home with her older siblings. In the end, her parents had to take her with them. It was not long before the others were clamoring to come too, complaining about a big sinting that was coming out of the nearby forest and eating their food every day. Taken aback by this revelation, Bro Anansi decided to remain behind the following morning to see what this sinting was. So shortly before mid-morning, he climbed into the ceiling overlooking the fireplace where the children's lunch had been left. And was he astonished at what he was about to witness? Let me set the spectacles good. He did not have long to wait before the ground began shaking. A huge reptilian creature of unbelievable proportions was approaching. Each step from its gigantic feet created a minor seismic event. Poor Bro Anansi was so terrified when he saw the huge monster approaching his home that he wetted himself without realizing it. He suddenly found himself trembling uncontrollably. His body felt too weak. A sweat broke out all over his body. His heart stopped beating when he saw the gigantic fat-tongued monster approach his terrified children in the yard. "Will nobody?" A sound like thunder inquired of the petrified children. "Garner Youngsha," they replied, as if rehearsed. "Will nobody?" the terrible question echoed. "Garner Youngsha," came the faithful chorus once again. "Where they bickle there?" Each syllable an awfully painful black hole in time and space. "It there for you, sir. "Lift up me tail high, high," the creature boomed once more as it lumbered to the lean-to kitchen door and extended its massively grotesque head inside. "Play with me tail, but not play with me pal," it added as it grasped the pot containing the children's lunch with jaws of steel. All this time, Bro Anansi was scared out of his wits. He witnessed the whole scene in dumb horror. It was a minor miracle that he was able to remain hidden in the touch of the ceiling. He was so overcome that he was struck with a bout of sudden and instantaneous diarrhea. Feces ran from him unrestrainedly, like an aquifer bursting forth after a heavy and prolonged downpour. The dew began to flow through the leg of his pants and fell to the floor with a loud plop, plop, plop. Alarmed, the creature looked around and bellowed at the children. "How was that?" "And me mother could start turn over laughter, sir," chimed one of them helplessly. The monster grunted and continued his massacre of the lunch with large gulps. When it was through licking the pot, it farted loudly and slowly backed away from the kitchen before turning around and stomping its way back into the bushes where it eventually disappeared. Poor Anansi. After it had gone, the silence was deafening. The children were slowly picking themselves up from the ground where they had been blown by the deafening fart. Anansi was stunned, rooted and paralyzed with horror. The wind had stopped blowing. The birds had stopped singing. Everything had become silent and awe-stricken. Eventually, Bro Anansi moved and almost fell out of the ceiling. Full stop. He was slowly returning to life, and his nostrils had begun to transmit the message of an awful stench to his brain. He fidgeted and experienced an unusual sensation of discomfort. He gradually became aware of the fact that not only were his clothes sopping wet, but they smelled like an overflowing toilet. No, they smelled worse. Anansi looked and listened carefully before descending from his perch. As he lowered himself to the ground, he continued to survey the terrain, shivering a couple of times as he became startled by the sound of his own heartbeat. Once he hit the ground, it took a great effort to prevent himself from running off and finding some place to hide. The children in the yard had returned to play as if nothing had happened. Anansi, however, felt weak as if he had just been through some great physical ordeal. He stumbled like a drunken man and kept muttering inaudibly to himself. He felt as if his heart was about to fall out through his belly button. He kept hearing all sorts of noises in his head. He felt as if he was in a dream that refused to end. He staggered to a mango tree and half sat, half fell at the root. There he remained in a stupor until his wife came home in the evening. Was she shocked to find Anansi sitting on the ground with his back propped against the mango tree and a vacant stare on his face? What astonished her most, though, was the awful smell and the swarm of flies buzzing around him like bees around a hive. "Anansi!" she shrieked. "Warren!" Bro Anansi looked at her for a long moment before he answered slowly, "Me see the same thing." "So what to you? How you look so?" Bro Anansi started to cry. "Me wife, me can't believe what me see. Me no know how all we no dead. Me so afraid. Me heart she don't be safe." Jesus. The woman suddenly began laughing. She laughed and screamed for a long time. When she was through, she looked at him scornfully and remarked, "Go down the river for being off your stinking self." Anansi sheepishly stood up and walked away. That night, he kept to himself in one corner. The rest of the family ignored him. Come morning, his wife woke him up early and posted him off to the fields while she stayed home to confront the monster, woman power. As mid-morning approached, she made a fire of logs at the side of the kitchen and placed an iron rod called a jammer with which farmers dig holes in it to heat. She then went to hide somewhere in the yard. She did not have long to wait. The earth soon began to shake as the huge creature lumbered into sight. After it greeted the children in its usual manner, "Well, you know, Maddy, he done a gunshot. Well, you know, Paddy, he done a gunshot. When he be good there, he there for your side, sir. Lift up me tail high, high. Play with me tail, but not play with me pal, pal. Hey, sir. As the children struggled with the gigantic tail, the mother stealthily crept out of hiding. She beckoned to the children to get out of the way as she used a large folded piece of fabric to grasp the metal rod, which she rammed with all her might into the anus of the greedy creature. In an instant, pandemonium broke loose. Full stop! Exclamation sign. The monster roared in shock and agony. It smashed through the kitchen, flattening it to the ground, and leaped a short distance where it fell with a loud thud. It writhed in pain for a short while and then lay still. Luckily for the children, none of them was injured during the whole scenario, and they soon overcame their fear and climbed atop the huge carcass. The name Hasunu was given to it by one of the neighbors who gathered to look at the marvel at its sight. Imagine Bro Anansi's shock when he came home. Jack MANDORA. So you love me big words then? Me have some more for you, but you fi hear that one, yeah. Me not finish yet. Yeah. This one is about the Queen's Gold Ring. Not very far from the village where Bro Anansi lived, there was a neighboring kingdom. Yes, that down Africa. They from Jamaica. The king had grown very old, so the queen had most of the responsibilities. The palace staff resented this, especially the three butlers. Now, the queen owned a beautiful gold ring which had been given to her by the king on their wedding day. This the butlers conspired to steal to teach her a lesson. So one day, when she took it off, one of them stole into her bedchamber and snatched it. They then hid it in a safe place outside the palace wall and waited to see what would happen. The queen became very upset when she realized that her ring was missing and no one could find it, not even her trusted chambermaid. She sent for wise men from all over her kingdom, but still the ring could not be found. At last, in desperation, she dispatched messengers far and wide to all surrounding countries to see if there was some wise magician who could find her lost gold signet ring. One day, while Bro Anansi and Bro Tukuma were helping Bro Tiger in his field, they saw a rider approaching. When he got closer and hailed them, they called him over for a drink of spring water and some thinking tour with honey. The grateful rider took no time in telling them of the Queen's gold ring and of his errand to find someone wise enough to discover what had happened to it. After he had refreshed himself, he thanked the good friends for their hospitality and rode off. Before he left though, Bro Tukuma gave him directions to Bro Dog's house. If anyone can find it, Bro Dog can. So said Bro Tukuma. They soon forget all about the incident. 2 weeks later, Bro Anansi ran into Bro Dog at Bro Mango's shop. Bro Dog was speaking a foreign accent and claiming to have just returned from a journey. Bro Anansi took him aside and asked him if he had gone to had found the ring. "How you knows about that?" cried Bro Dog. "Because Tukuma sent the man to find you," replied Bro Anansi. "Well, if you must know, a wicked fairy turned into a bird and steal the Queen's gold ring," continued Bro Dog. "I could smell no trace of it." Bro Anansi became upset. He thought Bro Dog had more sense than that. He did not say anything to him though. Next morning, before daybreak, Bro Anansi set off on a long journey without telling anyone where he was going. 3 days later, he arrived at the palace of the queen, who had lost the gold ring. When Bro Anansi told the guards that he had come to find the queen's missing gold ring, he was escorted immediately into the palace to see her. After looking at him keenly, she informed him that he would be given a day to find the missing ring. If at the end of the day the ring was still not found, the guards were instructed to take him outside and hang him. Bro Anansi. He would also be given 3 meals, during which he could eat all that he wanted. Being at a loss for words, Anansi could only nod his head. The first meal was served by one of the 3 butlers. He watched Bro Anansi keenly while he ate in silence. At the end of the meal, while he was leaving the room with the dishes, he thought he heard Anansi say, "One gone left too." The butler mentioned it to his colleagues. At the end of the second meal, which was served by the second butler, Anansi said, "Two gone left one." The butler hurried away and told his cohorts. They began to wonder, because apart from that, he had said nothing at all since his arrival. The third one peeped through the door. When Bro Anansi saw him, he said, he rushed back to the others and told them. They decided then and there that the funny little Spider-Man with the sharp eyes and boastful manner knew. They started to become afraid and decided to approach him. They went and gathered up all the money and jewelry that they had pilfered over the years and called him aside into another room where they offered him everything if he did not tell the queen what he knew. Bro Anansi gave in with great reluctance after much pleading and begging. He then outlined a plan to them. Later that evening, when the queen sent for him and asked him if he knew what had become of her ring, he replied, "Yes, your majesty." He then told her how her gold ring had fallen off her finger while she was feeding her geese. He also took her into the yard and showed her which one had swallowed it. She ordered the servants to catch the goose and kill it. Lo and behold, there in its stomach was the gold ring laughing at them. The queen was so grateful that she gave Bro Anansi many rich gifts and made him an ambassador of her country. And he lived happily ever after. Jack MANDORA, I should have been that. May have some more things to tell you, but me go make them wait till me hear from you. Send one barrel come here and some dollars and some pounds. Things not so bright here now, cause they joke the bandway and the dirty tougher than before. Take care of yourself, yeah, me love, and say howdy to Perenke and the rest of picnic them. God bless you, my child. Your loving uncle, Gilbert. Jack MANDORA. The story done.
No heathen, no heathen should not judge I, should not condemn I. No heathen, no heathen should not judge I, should not condemn I. Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Cause already we are ready, we are ready. Already we are ready, we are ready. Already we are ready, we are ready. Already we are ready. We are making a new discovery, a serious look at reality, a reappraisal of our history, laws and society, to examine the cause of misery.
What weapon in your armory of aggression can create a free little nation with a bright and enlightened population, exempt from poverty and oppression, with no have-nots or disenfranchised, no one demeaned or brutalized. Truth and justice are fully realized, human rights and privileges recognized. No suicide bombers in the area, pure love in Iran and North Korea. Tanks we run, we gone left Burma, and we not afraid when we hear about Al-Qaeda. No acts of sabotage, no cruelty. Politicians are men of integrity. No news about crime and robbery, and we all breathe the air of plenty. Everyone is considered fortunate. No racism, bigotry, no hate. No type of evil could infiltrate this great little world you would create. With the boat, we carry you over wide Sargasso Sea. With the rum where them use and drunk you, and tell you say you'll soon be free. With the glass where them use and trick you, and say he's a demon you see. With the rope and chain we bind you to the bark of the old cotton tree. With the whip where him use and beat you when you're sick and can't do no more. With the turpentine and jeers where him put in your thinking sore. With the woman there where him give you after him rape her how much time. With the dog and gun we come for you, car run away is a vicious crime. With the drum there where you beat when you hear say you free paper come. With the sugar gone, can it no sweet, them still a treat you like you're dumb. With the journey back to freedom, that is still your due. With the pay and the compensation, that is still owing to you. With the progress and development that the promise forget you ex. With the wealth and opportunities, what will they promise next? With the future for your generation, it's still on the drawing board. With the striving to build a better nation, them give upon your machete and say a sword. Night of hate, shackled truth, darkness, with a text so noisy that your eyes do not see the progression of my vision. Diet of words too often used, sentences of changing meaning. Show me the soul of yesteryear and the history of the future. All that which is, but exists not, the reason for eternity. What gives men their reality?
Shatta no, Shatta got to go. Mr. Shatta no, Shatta got to go. Shatta no, Shatta got to go. Mr. Shatta no, Shatta got to go. Mr. Shatta, you know better about the mad economy. Mr. Shatta, you know free what they take the rest away. Me go just load up your tool pan the ready, you know see. Dog nyam your supper if you try to stop me. Somebody you go feel it, cause you did the pan the ready. When you reveal it, shut down boss already. Shatta no, Shatta got to go. Shatta no, Shatta got to go. Me say Shatta no, Shatta got to go. Shatta no, Shatta got to go. Mr. Shatta, you know bad about the mad economy. Mr. Shatta, you know feel what they kill the rest away. You just load up the tool and the ready, you know see. That yummy your supper if you try to stop me. Somebody I go feel it, cause you did the pan ready. When you reveal it, shut down boss already. Shatta no, Shatta got to go. Mr. Shatta no, Shatta got to go. Shatta no, Shatta got to go. Mr. Shatta no, Shatta got to go. Shatta no, Shatta got to go. Mr. Shatta no, Shatta got to go. Mr. Shatta no, Shatta got to go. Mr. Shatta, you know bad about the mad economy. Mr. Shatta, you know feel what they kill the rest of it. You just load up your tool and be ready, you know see. That yummy your supper if you try to stop me. Now the I go feel it, cause you did it and be ready. When you reveal it, shut down us already. Shatta no, Shatta got to go. Mr. Shatta no, Shatta got to go. Shatta no, Mr. Shatta got to go. Africa, a lion early in the morning, not tempted to bask while the dawn breaks. I get horribly depressed whenever I consider Africa. Such a massive affront to the Creator and mankind committed against a whole continent. Do you still wonder why the African hates and fears himself and his own identity? Every time I consider the African situation, water come on me eye and the cold shiver runs through me. And as if the problem of gross ignorance, barbarity, and oppression were not enough, now they are saddled with the additional burden of HIV/AIDS. And the thing about it is, we no see, we no know, we no care anyhow. And when we done, we chat about lion and the Almighty no say we no bow. Cause we a freedom warrior, no follow all of you. So no matter what them do, me say no matter what them say. When Africa is free, oh what a glorious day. When brutality and poverty and AIDS are on way. This no racist, not apartheid, disagree on every side. With your petty civil war and your tribe against tribe. Some are kill for wealth and power, some just want a free ride. But someday it shall be over like a swift flowing tide. And the wicked that will run, but can he find a place to hide? The good who selling little brothers can put thief in sister pride. The one who blame other people for the wrongs where he might hide. But you him get away with murder, him a van, pumps and pride. But when the roll is called up yonder, tell me where he might go hide. South Africa, South Africa, South Africa, South Africa. Apartheid gone. South Africa. Can you honestly call yourself truly reconciled? With freedom come, you know hear the drum. With freedom come. With freedom
freedom come, you know hear the drum. We freedom come. It come out of east, it come in a west, it come up north, it come all about salvation. Come and you know hear the drum, it come. Me say we freedom come and you know hear the drum, we freedom come. We freedom come and you know hear the drum, we freedom come. After long years of suffering in the backwoods and concrete jungles, sweating in the cold wind and the rain, doubled up through the pain. No liberation come and you know hear the drum, it come. We freedom come and you know hear the drum, we freedom come. We freedom come and you know hear the drum, we freedom come. Forced into a death wish of endless suffering. Forced with cocaine technology, human rights don't mean a thing. But now, redemption come and you know hear the drum, it come. Me say we freedom come and you know hear the drum, we freedom come. We freedom come and you know hear the drum, we freedom come. Hallelujah to our Father who is both God and King. For he has rescued us from bondage and from sin and given us the strength to stand up and fight with word, songs and power. Black people, unite, 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 because with freedom come and you know hear the drum, it come. Me say we freedom come and you know hear the drum, we freedom come. We freedom come and you know hear the drum, we freedom come. We freedom come and you know hear the drum, we freedom come. With word, songs and power we come. With word, songs and power we come. Black people unite, 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 unite. Because we freedom come. You know hear the drum, it come.
Against those who hold me in captivity, then I run home to pray very hastily. Oh God Almighty, please save me. Oh God Almighty, please save me. Oh God Almighty, please save me. From the Queen, the Prime Minister, the Deputy, from the police, the judge and the army, and return me to the land from which they stole me. Oh God Almighty, please hear 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 me. Already we are ready, we are ready. 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 Already we are ready. Ready, we are ready. Ready, we are ready. Ready, we are ready.